The summons arrived without preamble, a heavy cream envelope interrupting the methodical silence of Marcus's study. He had been immersed in the meticulous reconstruction of a minor medieval trade route, a task demanding absolute focus, and the interruption was unwelcome. The return address, a firm of solicitors in a city he rarely visited, provided no immediate context. Marcus, a man whose life revolved around the verifiable facts of history, possessed little patience for the unexpected. He slit the seal with a bone letter opener, a relic from an archaeological dig, and extracted the single sheet. The language was formal, precise, outlining the recent passing of a distant relative he barely recalled. A reclusive great-aunt. The inheritance was the salient detail. Blackwood Manor. Marcus reread the name. Blackwood Manor. It was a property he knew of, not personally, but through local historical archives. A decaying edifice, widely regarded as a local curiosity, burdened by generations of grim folklore. He had dismissed the tales as provincial embellishments, the kind of superstitious narrative that proliferated in isolated communities lacking empirical distraction. The idea of inheriting it was, at best, an administrative nuisance. A week later, Marcus found himself seated across from the solicitor, a gaunt man with an overly starched collar. The office was hushed, smelling faintly of old paper and furniture polish. The solicitor spoke in measured tones, detailing the estate, the considerable land, and the manor itself. Marcus listened, his mind already calculating the logistics of selling such a property, its upkeep an obvious drain, its historical value negligible beyond its architectural period. There is, however, a stipulation, the solicitor stated, his voice dropping slightly. His gaze met his, holding it with an uncharacteristic intensity. A condition of the will, drafted with particular exactitude by your great-aunt. Marcus felt a faint prickle of irritation. Conditions were inefficient. "And what is that?" he inquired, his voice flat. "Reveal discovery. You are required to take up residence at Blackwood Manor," the solicitor explained, "for a minimum of 1 calendar year. Failure to do so will result in the entire estate reverting to a distant charitable trust, with no provision for your benefit." The words settled in the quiet office like dust. He processed them. A year. In a house whose reputation preceded it like a miasma. He considered the impracticality, the disruption to his current research, the sheer inconvenience. Yet the estate was substantial. His own means were comfortable, but the prospect of such an acquisition, even with its attached caveats, was not entirely without appeal. He was a historian, after all. Perhaps there were untapped archives within its walls, something of academic interest that might justify the personal displacement. He dismissed the local legends as the product of uneducated minds, a collective delusion. Superstition had no place in his ordered world. The journey began 3 days later. Marcus arranged for a private car to take him as far as the nearest significant transit point, a small, neglected railway depot that served the remote district. The landscape gradually shed its familiar contours, yielding to vast stretches of moorland and ancient, gnarled forests. The sky, which had been a clear, indifferent gray, began to press down, heavy and uniform. When the car finally pulled away from the main road, the journey became a series of jolts and lurches along a gravel track. The driver, a taciturn man whose face was etched with the local weather, offered only grunts in response to his few questions about the area. The air thickened, carrying the damp scent of decaying leaves and wet earth. The railway depot appeared as a skeletal structure against the bruised horizon. It was a desolate place. A single corroded track stretching into the distance, a dilapidated platform, and a small, boarded-up building that might once have been a ticket office. The wind here was a physical presence, carrying the faint, metallic tang of rust and an underlying, indefinable mustiness. No trains had stopped here in decades, a fact made obvious by the overgrown weeds pushing through the cracked asphalt and the complete absence of human activity. The silence, punctuated only by the mournful sigh of the wind, was profound, almost oppressive. Its driver, a stoic man with graying temples, emerged and silently transferred Marcus's luggage from the first car. The exchange was brief, professional, yet he felt an odd weight in the air, a reluctance in the local man's movements. The first driver departed without a backward glance. The final leg of the journey was even slower, the track narrowing further, the trees closing in, their skeletal branches forming an increasingly dense canopy overhead. The light, already dim, became a perpetual twilight. Marcus felt a subtle shift in the air pressure, a coolness that seeped through the vehicle's windows. His historian's mind cataloged the geological formations, the endemic flora, all with a detached academic interest. But beneath that, a faint, unacknowledged unease began to coalesce. Then, through a sudden break in the trees, Blackwood Manor appeared. It was not merely large, it was monolithic. Gabled roofs climbed to dizzying heights, punctuated by a forest of chimneys. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from behind the grime of generations. The very air around it seemed different, still and heavy, as if the manor itself was exhaling. The driver pulled to a halt some distance from the main entrance, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He did not turn off the engine. "This is it, sir," he said, his voice unusually low. "I'll wait for you to unlock." He exited the vehicle. The wind, which had been a constant companion on the moor, died completely here, replaced by a profound, dead stillness. He walked towards the massive wrought iron gates, which stood ajar, their hinges groaning in the slight breeze he imagined rather than felt. The drive beyond was choked with weeds, the path to the front door obscured by generations of neglect. He suppressed it. It was merely a very old, very neglected building. Nothing more. His skepticism remained a shield, firm and unyielding. He reached the front door. It was an enormous slab of oak, studded with tarnished iron. No knocker, no bell. Only a massive, rusted lock. Marcus produced the heavy brass key the solicitor had provided. He inserted it into the keyhole. The mechanism released with a dull, resonant thud. He pushed the door inward. A wave of cold air, stale and heavy with the scent of dust and something else. Something indescribably ancient washed over him. He stepped inside. The door, with a soft, deliberate sigh, closed behind him. The silence was immediate, total and absolute. That was both earthy and metallic, like old coins pressed into damp soil. He had never encountered anything quite like it. The manor's front door, a slab of weathered oak adorned with tarnished iron, yielded with a low groan that vibrated through the stone lintel. Light struggled through grime-streaked windows, painting weak rectangles on the flagstone floor. The vast hall stretched before him, a cavernous space where shadows clung to the high, vaulted ceiling. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped like forgotten tapestries from every corner. Marcus, a man whose life revolved around the meticulous dissection of the past, felt an unexpected shiver. It was not fear, he told himself, but the chill of a truly unheated, long-abandoned structure. His first priority was the arrival of his research materials. Days later, a large delivery truck hired from the nearest town finally navigated the winding track. Marcus met the driver at the manor's gate, directing the transfer of crates and boxes. His entire life's work, a vast collection of historical texts, archival reproductions, and personal notes, had been shipped weeks prior to a regional railway depot and stored there, awaiting his final instructions. Now a smaller, more nimble vehicle had ferried it up the moor, box by heavy box. He supervised the placement of the crates in the manor's largest ground-floor room, a grand library that, despite its desolation, still housed empty, imposing shelves. "Just stack 'em anywhere, lad," he'd instructed the driver, a burly man with a perpetually furrowed brow. "Marcus will sort them out." The driver, after a quick, nervous glance around the echoing hall, simply nodded. eager to complete the task and depart. Marcus paid him, watched the truck disappear down the track, and then turned to the formidable task of unpacking. He spent the next few days in a methodical frenzy. Books emerged from their cardboard prisons, their spines cracking faintly as he arranged them by period and subject. Bundles of meticulously organized notes, cross-referenced and indexed, found their new home on a temporary table he'd set up in the library's center. He worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by instant coffee and a fierce intellectual drive. The manor, in these initial days, was merely a large, inconvenient container for his work. It was during the third evening, as dusk bled purple into the high windows, that the first anomaly occurred. He was cross-referencing a particularly dense volume on medieval land tenure with a set of photocopied parish records. He paused, his pen hovering over a footnote. He turned, slowly, expecting to see an open window or a draft from a poorly sealed door. Nothing. The heavy library door was shut, and the leaded windows were all tightly latched. The air, though generally cool, had no other noticeable currents. It was gone, replaced by the ambient temperature of the room. A trick of the old building, he mused. Perhaps a thermal eddy caused by the vast stone walls cooling unevenly. He dismissed it, returning to his work, but a faint, almost imperceptible unease settled in his stomach. The following morning, he discovered a book, a rare first edition of a 17th century treatise on ecclesiastical law, lying open on the floor. He distinctly remembered placing it on the second shelf of a newly organized bookcase before retiring for the night. He picked it up, noting the faint impression of dust on its leather cover, as if it had settled there for hours. He frowned. He was meticulous to a fault. Had he, in his exhaustion, simply dropped it? Unlikely. More plausible, perhaps, was a tremor in the old house, dislodging a precariously placed volume. He reshelved it, checking the stability of the other books around it. They seemed secure. Later that week, as he wrestled a heavy oak desk from one corner of the library to another, a faint sibilant sound reached his ears. He stopped, straining. The sound ceased. His mind, ever the rationalist, immediately sought a source. Wind through a crevice? The settling of old timbers? The house was vast, filled with unseen nooks and crannies. He attributed it to the creaks and groans inherent in any ancient structure. Yet he found himself holding his breath, a faint tightening in his chest. His work continued, a bulwark against the subtle oddities. He needed to establish a comprehensive timeline of the manor's previous occupants. He spent hours poring over the few extant deeds and parish records he had brought with him. One afternoon, while clearing out a small, forgotten closet off the main study, a space he intended to convert into a secure archive, his hand brushed against something rough, tucked behind a loose panel in the wall. He pried the panel away, revealing a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in brittle yellowed linen, were 3 leather-bound journals. The first, its cover faded to a dull gray, bore the elegant looping script of a woman, dated from the early 18th century. The ink was fragile, but readable. Marcus opened it carefully, the dry pages crackling. The early entries were mundane, detailing household affairs and social visits. But as he turned the pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew erratic, scrawled with increasing urgency. My memories fray like old lace. The woman wrote of a pervasive weariness, a sense of her own thoughts dissolving, replaced by fleeting images that were not her own. She spoke of a growing struggle to recall simple facts, of a fear that her very mind was being leached away. He flipped to the end of the journal. The last entry was a desperate, almost illegible scribble. Marcus cannot remember my husband's face. It feeds. This was more than superstition. This was a direct, visceral account of a mind under siege. He picked up the second journal, its cover identical, and felt the weight of something far older and more insidious than mere time. Marcus spent the next few days in a blur of activity, his hands sore from lifting crates, his mind occupied with the meticulous organization of his inherited library. Books emerged from their cardboard tombs, their aged spines breathing the dust of decades into the stale air of the manor. He arranged them by subject, then by publication date, an act of intellectual order against the encroaching disarray of his new life. The sheer volume of material was daunting, a historical testament piled floor to ceiling. The silence of the manor, initially a welcome balm after the city's ceaseless drone, began to assert a different quality. It was not empty, but rather a dense, watchful quiet. Marcus heard the house breathe. The old timbers groaned, a low, sustained sigh. The wind, when it stirred, did not merely whistle through the eaves, but seemed to whisper just beyond his hearing, a rustling that might have been parchment or dry leaves. He dismissed these sounds as the natural symphony of an ancient structure settling, the product of his own heightened awareness in an unfamiliar environment. He spun around, his heart giving a startled lurch against his ribs. The study was empty, save for the stacked boxes and the heavy furniture. The window was latched, the door closed. Later that week, a delivery arrived at the local railway depot. A special order of obscure 19th century county records and rare historical maps, essential for his deeper research into the manor's past. The depot was a cavernous, echoing space of corrugated iron and concrete, smelling of coal dust and damp wood. A lone clerk, a thin man with tired eyes, processed his claim. Marcus signed the ledger, his name an ordinary mark among smudged entries. The world outside the manor felt sharp, noisy, and almost painfully real in contrast. Back in his study, surrounded by the newly arrived documents, the subtle shifts continued. Each time he turned, the space was empty, bathed in the same dim, filtered light. He attributed it to fatigue, to the strain on his eyes from hours of reading small print. He pushed the growing unease aside, focusing on the task at hand. His sleep, however, offered no such refuge. Vivid nightmares began to plague him. He dreamt of being trapped in endless corridors, the walls themselves shifting and breathing, their surfaces slick with an unseen moisture. He would lie awake for hours listening to the house, convinced he heard the faint echo of those dream voices in the actual walls around him. He immersed himself in the newly acquired county records, cross-referencing names, dates, and property transfers. The previous occupants of the manor began to coalesce into a grim pattern. There was the merchant, Elias Thorne, who had purchased the estate in 1789. Records showed a rapid decline in his mental state, culminating in his disappearance from the manor in 1795, his family claiming he had simply wandered off and was never found. Then came the widow, Eleanor Vance, who inherited it in 1832. Each resident, without exception, had lived in prolonged isolation within the manor's walls. Each had succumbed to either madness, disappearance, or suicide. His initial skepticism, once a sturdy shield, was now riddled with holes. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a recurring, horrifying narrative. The house wasn't just old. It was a devourer of minds, a collector of desperate ends. He found a rhythm, a comforting repetition in placing volumes onto the dark, polished shelves. It was a bulwark against the unsettling silence of the manor, a tangible assertion of order in a place that felt increasingly untamed. Yet, an undercurrent of unease persisted, a low hum beneath his diligent focus. One afternoon, while meticulously aligning a row of leather-bound chronicles, a sharp, disorienting image flashed in his mind. The vision lasted no more than a second, a violent intrusion. Marcus stumbled back, his breath catching. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his temples. He returned to his work, but the image lingered, a sharp shard in his mental landscape. The occurrences became more frequent, more insistent. A child's faint, desperate cry seemed to echo from the empty nursery above the library, a sound so fragile it could have been merely the wind. He heard the distinct scraping of a chair across a wooden floor in the drawing room when he knew it to be empty. He would pause, listen intently, and then dismiss it, his rational mind struggling to reconcile the sensory input with the physical reality of the vacant house. His determination, once a solid shield, began to show hairline cracks. The feeling of being watched became almost constant. It wasn't the sensation of an intruder, but something far more insidious. It was as if the very walls held countless unseen eyes, evaluating, observing, perhaps even absorbing. A prickling sensation often spread across his scalp, raising the fine hairs on his neck. A phantom touch that made him whirl around, only to find nothing but the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. A week into his residency, a notification arrived regarding a consignment of rare historical maps he had ordered months ago, now awaiting pickup at the railway depot. The thought of leaving the manor, even for a brief excursion, brought an unexpected sense of relief. The depot, a place of industry and mundane purpose, would be a welcome antidote to the manor's encroaching strangeness. The journey was uneventful. The railway depot was a sprawling complex of corrugated iron sheds and concrete platforms, permeated by the smell of diesel and damp earth. A constant low rumble vibrated through the ground from distant train movements. Marcus presented his documentation to the clerk, a stoic man with ink-stained fingers, and waited. The rumble of a shunting engine seemed to warp, transforming into a distant, mournful wail. Then the vision seized him with an unprecedented force. The depot's concrete floor dissolved into muddy tracks. The fluorescent lights became the weak, flickering glow of lanterns. He heard hushed, urgent voices, their words indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Despair, secrecy. The gaunt man looked up, his eyes meeting Marcus's, not with surprise, but with a profound, ancient sorrow. The vision snapped back. Marcus gasped, clutching the cold metal railing beside him. The depot, with its utilitarian harshness, returned to focus. The clerk called his name, holding a clipboard. Marcus stared at his own trembling hand, then at the clerk, who merely raised an eyebrow. The metallic, cloying scent still clung to the air, or perhaps it was only in his memory. This was something else entirely. The railway depot, a place of transit and commerce, had become a conduit, dragging him into a past that was not his own. He collected his package, his movements stiff, his mind reeling. The drive back to the manor was a blur. The rational explanations, once so readily available, had withered. He could no longer dismiss the experiences as mere imagination. They were too vivid, too real, too intrusive. He felt its presence even before he stepped inside, a vast, hungry consciousness. His skepticism, once a sturdy edifice, had fractured beyond repair. It was alive, and it was watching him, waiting. Books emerged from their cardboard tombs, their aged spines breathing dust into the stagnant air. The initial urgency, however, had begun to wane, replaced by a slow, almost ritualistic pace. He had not shaved in days. The stubble on his jaw felt rough, an unfamiliar texture against his fingertips when he absently rubbed his chin. Meals became an afterthought, often a forgotten luxury until a gnawing emptiness in his stomach forced him to rummage for a forgotten biscuit or a piece of stale bread. The concept of time itself grew nebulous. Was it Tuesday or Thursday? The question felt trivial, irrelevant in the manor's deep quiet. His focus narrowed, encompassing only the house, its history, and the endless silent task of settling in. His mobile phone lay charging on a dusty side table, its screen dark. When he finally picked it up, the battery icon was full, yet the signal bars remained stubbornly empty. He tried again, moving to different windows, even stepping out onto the cracked stone terrace. Nothing. Only the faint, persistent hum of the house itself seemed to resonate. A landline, then. He remembered seeing an old rotary phone in the study. The receiver felt heavy, cold, almost dead in his hand. No dial tone. He pressed the buttons, listened intently. Only a faint electrical fizzing sound. This unexpected severance from communication was unsettling, but not, he noted with a strange detachment, alarming. It felt appropriate. The house had always been remote. Still, supplies were finite. Food, toiletries, even more research materials. A trip was unavoidable. The thought of leaving, however, was met with an unexpected resistance. The crisp, cool air outside seemed thin, alien. He forced himself to don a jacket, to find his keys. Each step towards the grand front doors felt like pushing through thick water. The hinges groaned in protest as he pulled one open, and the sunlight, when it finally struck his face, felt harsh, too bright. He blinked, his eyes accustomed to the manor's perpetual gloom. The drive down the long, overgrown lane was a blur. The familiar landscape of fields and distant hills seemed muted, less vibrant than he remembered. The railway depot was a squat brick building, smelling faintly of coal dust and damp wood. Inside, a solitary clerk sat behind a scratched counter, sorting through a pile of envelopes. Marcus approached, his voice sounding rusty in his own ears. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a perpetually slumped posture, barely looked up. "Can I help you?" Her voice was flat, devoid of interest. Marcus provided his name, the tracking number. The clerk shuffled through a stack of brown parcels, then consulted a ledger, her finger tracing lines of script. "Nothing here under that name, sir. And that tracking number, it's not in our system." A flicker of frustration ignited within Marcus. "That's impossible. I received a confirmation email, a dispatch notice. It should have arrived last week." The clerk simply shrugged, her gaze already drifting back to her envelopes. "Sorry, sir. Nothing." Her tone implied he was wasting her time, perhaps even fabricating the entire claim. He tried to argue, to explain, but her disinterest was a solid wall. The encounter was futile. It was as if his existence, his concerns, held no weight outside the manor's sphere. The drive back was quicker, propelled by an almost magnetic draw. As he approached the manor's gates, a sense of relief washed over him, a deep, settling calm that surprised him. It was home. He unloaded the sparse bags, placing the items in the cavernous pantry. His energy, already low, seemed to drain further with each passing hour within the manor's walls. His historical work, once his singular passion, now seemed to merge indistinguishably with the house itself. The lines blurred. He was not merely researching its past. He was becoming entangled in it, an extension of its silent, hungry existence. He no longer felt driven to leave. The thought of stepping out again, of facing that indifferent outside world, felt like an unnecessary exertion. His determination had not vanished, but it had warped, twisting into an unwavering resolve to simply be here, to surrender to the manor's profound, consuming quiet. The clerk's indifferent shrug, a physical manifestation of official dismissal, replayed in Marcus's mind. He had left the municipal office with a hollow ache, the air outside sharp and unwelcoming. It was as if the building itself had been expunged from bureaucratic memory. He walked, not entirely sure of his destination, but his feet, heavy and resolute, eventually led his back towards the winding, overgrown path that snaked towards the estate. The manor loomed, a jagged silhouette against the bruised sky, its windows like vacant eyes. A profound weariness settled over him, not just from the long walk, but from the relentless, subtle pressure the house exerted. He pushed the heavy door open, the groan of ancient hinges echoing through the vast, cold hall. He found himself standing in the entrance, not quite sure what he intended to do. The research papers he had meticulously organized lay scattered across the study desk, a forgotten landscape of facts and dates. A sudden, sharp ache pierced his temples. For a moment, the words on the page blurred, not into illegibility, but into a different language, a different script entirely. He blinked, the pain receding, and the familiar English text reasserted itself. A trick of the light, he told himself, or perhaps the onset of a migraine. Later, in the main hall, Marcus found himself pausing before the grand staircase. He had climbed these steps countless times. Yet, as he reached for the banister, his hand hesitated. At the top, he turned left towards his bedroom, a route he knew intimately. But the corridor stretched longer than he remembered, the walls adorned with tapestries he couldn't recall seeing before. They depicted scenes of pastoral life, yet the faces of the figures seemed subtly distorted, their smiles too wide, their eyes too deep. He walked the length of the corridor, his determination warring with a burgeoning unease. At its end, where his bedroom door should have been, there was only a solid expanse of wall, covered in the same unsettling tapestry. His breath hitched. This was impossible. He spun around, trying to reorient himself, but the corridor behind him seemed to have shortened, the tapestries now replaced by cracked, peeling paint. A wave of disorientation washed over him. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, then opened them again. He had never seen it before. A doorway he remembered leading to the library now opened into a small, dusty antechamber filled with forgotten trunks. He was trapped within a shifting maze of his own home. A thought, not his own, seemed to surface from the depths of his mind. The plans are useless now. They shift as the mind shifts. He stumbled, pressing a hand to his forehead. Whose thought was that? He was Marcus, a historian, a man of logic and fact. Yet the conviction that he had lived here for centuries, that he had seen these walls change and reform, was disturbingly potent. He caught his reflection in a tarnished mirror in a dimly lit alcove. The face staring back was his own, but the eyes held a distant, haunted quality, a weariness that felt ancient, not just his 39 years. For a fleeting moment, the face seemed to blur, the features softening, the hair thinning, becoming that of a different man, a man from a faded daguerreotype he had once seen in a forgotten archive. The idea of the railway depot surfaced, a concrete external landmark. It was a long walk, but the need to escape the house's tightening grip propelled him. He found his way downstairs, the descent feeling longer, the staircase twisting in ways it shouldn't. The world outside felt muted, distant, as if viewed through a thick pane of glass. The air thrummed with the distant rumble of an approaching train, a sound that felt both alien and strangely comforting. He stood on the platform, the cold wind biting at his exposed skin. Why was he here? The purpose of his hurried journey had evaporated, leaving only a vast, echoing emptiness. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused, and a strange certainty bloomed within him. These were not his hands. They belonged to a laborer, a man who toiled on the tracks, waiting for a shipment of coal, perhaps, or a new engine part. He wore no uniform, yet the phantom ache of a shovel handle against his palm was vivid. He was not Marcus. He was someone else, a worker, waiting, perpetually waiting at this very depot. The train roared past, a blur of speed and noise, and Marcus watched it go, a faint, melancholic sigh escaping his lips. He had forgotten where he was going, or even who he was. The manor had begun its true work. The refusal to acknowledge the manor's existence in any official capacity, the complete absence of records, had not extinguished his conviction but rather sharpened it into a desperate edge. If official channels yielded nothing, then unofficial ones must exist. His historian's instinct, dulled by recent events but not yet extinguished, clawed its way to the surface. There had to be an alternative archive, a forgotten repository of local history, perhaps even a collection of personal effects from the manor's earliest inhabitants. He thought of the dusty, leather-bound ledgers he'd glimpsed in the manor's choked-off library, too fragile to touch, too obscure to decipher without context. A railway depot. The drive was long, the roads narrower and more overgrown with each mile. The gray sky pressed down, mirroring the weight on his chest. He navigated by a combination of the faded map and sheer guesswork, following the ghost of a track that sliced through dense, skeletal woods. When he finally found it, the railway depot was less a building and more a monument to decay. Its corrugated iron roof sagged like a tired beast, rusted sheets peeling back to expose splintered rafters. The air here was thick with the scent of damp earth, ferrous decay, and something else. A stagnant, cloying sweetness that made his stomach clench. He pushed open a warped timber door, its hinges screaming in protest, and stepped into a cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through grimy windows, illuminating forgotten machinery shrouded in cobwebs. The floor was a mosaic of broken concrete and compacted dirt. Rows of shelving, once laden with cargo, now stood empty, save for the occasional bird's nest or a scattering of desiccated leaves. Marcus moved with a historian's methodical precision, ignoring the shiver that traced its way down his spine. They were not official, not meant to be found. He ignored it, his focus absolute. He pried open the first crate with a crowbar he'd brought from the manor, the wood groaning. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, were not tools or supplies, but personal effects. A child's porcelain doll with one vacant eye. A woman's silver locket, tarnished black. And beneath them, a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle, their ink faded. Marcus pulled them out one by one. The first, dated nearly 2 centuries ago, belonged to a woman named Ilara. Her elegant script detailed the early days of the manor, the joy of a new home. Then, the entries grew fragmented, confused. It takes my thoughts, my memories of the sea, of my mother's face. They slip away like smoke. The handwriting became erratic, spidery. It hungers. Marcus feel it. And it draws from me, from my very core. The final entry was a desperate scrawl. It is not haunted. It is hungry. He picked up the next journal, this one from a man, a subsequent inhabitant, dated a century later. The entries began with the scholar's meticulous observations of the manor's architecture, its strange, almost organic patterns. Then the tone shifted. My studies, they fade. Concepts, names, dates, gone. The house, it drinks, not water, not blood. It grows stronger. Marcus feel its pulse now, a slow, predatory beat. It feeds on my very essence, leaving only the shell. The last page was blank, save for a single deep indentation, as if the pen had been pressed down with desperate futile force. His hands began to shake, the paper rustling softly. He remembered his own lapses, the forgotten hours, the blurring lines between his own memories and the manor's past. He remembered the feeling of being watched, not by a ghost, but by something vast and conscious. The growing exhaustion, the inexplicable hunger he sometimes felt, not for food, but for something undefined. It wants everything. My joy, my sorrow, my dreams. It siphons them, devours them. The past, the present, all dissolving into its maw. This author described seeing glimpses of previous victims, not as apparitions, but as fading reflections in polished surfaces, their faces devoid of life, their eyes empty. It leaves nothing behind but echoes and a renewed appetite. The truth, stark and horrifying, slammed into Marcus with the force of a physical blow. Blackwood Manor was not merely haunted. It was a living, malevolent entity. It fed. It consumed. It didn't just absorb memories. It ate them, along with sanity and the very life force that sustained its inhabitants. And with each victim, with each memory devoured, it grew stronger, its presence solidifying, its grasp tightening. The low thrum beneath his feet intensified, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, from the direction of the manor. He was not merely a guest, not an investigator. He was its current, preferred meal. He was trapped. The house wasn't a place, it was a predator, and it had chosen him. The truth had been a physical blow, a concussive force that rattled Marcus's teeth and blurred his vision. Blackwood Manor was not merely a structure. It was a hungry, malevolent consciousness. It consumed, it devoured, it feasted on the very essence of life, leaving husks of memory and sanity in its wake. The realization, stark and unyielding, should have crushed him. But instead, a cold, hard knot of defiance solidified in his gut. He was not a meal. He would not be consumed. A frantic energy surged through him, an adrenaline-fueled clarity cutting through the creeping fog the house had cultivated in his mind. He had to fight. His gaze swept over the library, once a sanctuary, now a cage of shifting shadows and whispering paper. Every book, every parchment, every dusty artifact suddenly felt charged with a sinister energy, a potential weapon or a hidden trap. He moved with a desperate urgency, his hands snatching at leather-bound volumes, tearing through loose leaves of historical records he had once meticulously catalogued. The house resisted, subtly at first. Words on pages would swim, rearrange themselves into nonsensical patterns, or vanish entirely, leaving blank yellowed parchment. Marcus ignored the growing pressure in his skull, the subtle suggestions of fatigue and despair that tried to seep into his thoughts. He needed to remember. The manor fed on memories, yes, but perhaps within those very memories lay its undoing. His fingers brushed against a heavy brass-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. He'd seen it before, but never truly examined its contents, dismissing it as a personal diary of little historical import. The house seemed to recoil, the humming intensifying to a low growl. This was it. This was different. He flipped it open, the brittle pages crackling. The handwriting was cramped, faded, but legible. It belonged to the manor's original builder, a man named Bartholomew. Marcus skimmed, his eyes darting, searching for a specific detail, a clue. Then a sentence caught his eye, scrawled in a shaky hand. The iron salvaged from the great disaster holds it at bay for a time. But the hunger grows. It demands the very heart of man, the locus of all memory, the place where the world is forged and undone. The words resonated, not just in his mind, but in his very bones. It wasn't a memory of the manor, but of a different place entirely. The air grew heavy with the smell of creosote and coal dust, a faint metallic tang. The library walls began to ripple, the ornate wallpaper dissolving into sheets of rusted corrugated iron. The mahogany shelves warped, becoming skeletal gantries, crisscrossed with thick, grimy cables. He stood, no longer in the library, but amidst the desolate sprawl of a vast, abandoned railway depot. Long, empty tracks stretched into the gloom, converging in the distance where a phantom whistle seemed to echo, thin and mournful. Rusted machinery lay scattered, half buried in piles of broken sleepers and damp earth. This was a memory, a vision, a horrifying projection, but it felt utterly real. The house was trying to confuse him, to overwhelm him with sensory overload, to drown the nascent spark of defiance. But Marcus fought back, clenching his jaw, forcing his mind to focus on the journal's words. The iron, salvaged from the great disaster. He took a step, the gravel crunching under his boots, a sound that should not exist on the polished floorboards of Blackwood Manor. His gaze swept the eerie landscape of the railway depot. There, amidst a tangle of rusted girders and shattered glass from a broken signal box, lay a massive, twisted beam of wrought iron. A sudden, jarring thought pierced the confusion. The railway depot had been the site of a catastrophic derailment decades ago, a forgotten local tragedy Marcus had briefly read about. A train, laden with a unique type of ore, had plunged into a ravine. The ore, according to a brief, obscure footnote, had been destined for a foundry that supplied specific high-grade iron for specialized construction, including, as it happened, the foundational supports of Blackwood Manor. It was old, impossibly old, yet it felt alive, brimming with a suppressed energy. This wasn't just any iron. This was the salvaged iron. It must be offered back. The anchor. An anchor. Not to destroy the house, perhaps, but to ground it, to bind it, to stop its consumption. The journal hinted at a ritual, a specific offering, a way to return the house's stolen sustenance, or perhaps to starve it by forcing it to regurgitate what it had taken. The implication was clear, terrifying. The house needed to be fed, or it needed to be tethered. The railway depot began to dissolve, the rusted iron and gravel fading, replaced by the familiar, yet now infinitely more menacing library walls. The journal felt heavy in his hands. No longer just a book, but a map to a terrifying, desperate act. Whatever it was, the journal's final, half-erased entry pulsed in Marcus's mind. Anchor. Not destruction, but containment. A binding, a forced regurgitation of the sustenance it had stolen. He clutched the worn leather, his knuckles white, the rough edges digging into his palm. This was not a futile gesture. It was a desperate strategy, born from the house's own history, a weakness implied by its very nature. He knew, with a certainty that transcended his creeping dread, that the house would not relinquish its hold easily. His determination, however, felt like a cold, sharp stone in his gut, a counterpoint to the pervasive chill of the manor. He moved through the vast, silent halls, a map of the manor's original layout now etched into his memory, overlaid with the journal's cryptic notes. The anchor, he surmised, lay deep within, in a place the house itself had tried to forget, or perhaps to bury. The old service tunnels beneath the west wing, leading to what was once a forgotten root cellar, seemed the most likely candidate. It was a place designed for storage, for grounding, for holding things in the earth's cool embrace. As he approached the oak door that marked the entrance to the servants' passage, a sudden guttural groan echoed from deep within the walls. The sound was not structural. It was organic, a low, drawn-out complaint that vibrated through the very floorboards beneath his feet. He reached for the heavy brass handle. As his fingers closed around it, the door slammed shut with a concussive force that rattled the ancient house, sending a shower of plaster dust from the ceiling. A faint, metallic clink followed, as if an unseen bolt had slid into place. Marcus stared at the now sealed door. He knew it was futile to try the handle again. The house was not merely reacting. It was actively impeding. He turned, seeking an alternate route, perhaps through the kitchen, then down the narrow, spiraling staircase he'd discovered weeks ago. As he stepped over the threshold, a row of copper pots hanging neatly above the island began to sway. Not gently, but with a violent, rhythmic swing, clattering against each other, their polished surfaces reflecting his distorted image. The sound was a cacophony, designed to disorient. He pressed on, his gaze fixed on the cellar door at the far end of the room. It flowed, coalescing into a vaguely human shape, tall and gaunt, its edges indistinct. It moved with a disturbing fluidity, stretching an arm towards him. The spectral figure didn't make a sound, but its presence was a palpable wave of despair and rage. He regained his balance, refusing to yield. This was the house's will, given form. This one, too, was locked. A high-pitched keening sound filled the kitchen, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of his sanity, pulling at old memories, old anxieties. He saw, for a flickering instant, a vast, cavernous space, filled with the echoing clang of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, the distant shriek of a whistle. The railway depot. Not the one he knew, but an older, grimmer version, bathed in a sickly yellow light. Figures moved through the steam, indistinct and hurried, their faces obscured. The vision twisted, the boy's face blurring into his own, the large hand becoming the house's tendrils, reaching for him. He blinked, the kitchen snapping back into focus. The keening faded, replaced by the persistent, rhythmic clatter of the copper pots. His breath hitched in his throat. The house was not just showing him memories. It was twisting them, making them personal, designed to break his will, to make him question his resolve. It was showing him what it did, what it had always done. Recalling another, more obscure access point, a concealed panel behind a false wall in the old library, leading to a narrow, forgotten crawl space that eventually connected to the service tunnels. It was a route he'd only discovered through an ancient architectural drawing. The house, in its arrogance, might have forgotten it. As he entered the library, the shelves themselves seemed to lean inward, the spines of the books blurred and indistinct, their titles shifting like sand. The air grew frigid, and the scent of dust and mildew was replaced by something cloying, sweet, and sickly, like decaying flowers. He flinched, spinning around. Nothing. A low growl emanated from the floorboards, vibrating up his legs. He found the faint seam, the barely visible outline of the panel. He pushed, then pulled, testing for the release mechanism. The house responded with a surge of malevolence. The floor beneath him buckled, tilting violently to one side, sending him sprawling. Books flew from the shelves, raining down on him, some striking his head and shoulders with surprising force. He scrambled to his feet, his determination hardening into a desperate fury. The house was fighting back with everything it had, a clear sign he was close. With a groan of ancient wood, the panel gave way, revealing a narrow, lightless opening. He didn't hesitate. The concealed panel in the library wall felt like a cold, smooth lie beneath Marcus's fingertips. It was not a seam, but a deliberate disruption in the oak. A section of the wainscoting that gave way with a soft, grinding protest when he applied pressure at the precise point he'd uncovered in the architect's obscure notes. The scent of ancient dust, trapped for centuries, billowed out, thick and cloying, a precursor to the deeper, more unsettling odors to come. He hesitated, his breath held, listening to the silence of the house, a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a predatory stillness. He squeezed through the narrow opening, the wood scraping against his shoulders, a tight, unyielding embrace. The air within the crawlspace was heavy, stagnant, tasting of dry rot and mildewed paper. His flashlight beam cut a meager path through the absolute blackness, revealing a low, coffin-like passage. Cobwebs, thick and laden with generations of dust, brushed against his face, clinging to his hair, a phantom touch that made his skin crawl. Each movement stirred more dust, clouding his vision, forcing him to squint. The passage sloped downwards, a subtle incline that suggested a descent into something far beneath the house's visible foundations. The crawlspace eventually widened, transitioning into a series of crudely excavated service tunnels. The walls were no longer wood, but damp, packed earth, shored up in places by crumbling brickwork. Water dripped somewhere in the unseen distance, a monotonous, maddening rhythm. Here, the house's influence grew more potent, less subtle. He knew they were not real, but the knowledge provided little comfort against the insidious creep of doubt. He saw fleeting shapes in the periphery of his vision, a gaunt face, a skeletal hand, gone as soon as he turned his head. The smell shifted, a metallic tang mingling with the earth and rot, reminiscent of old iron and forgotten machinery. For a moment, he could almost hear the distant rhythmic clang of metal on metal, the hiss of steam, the low rumble of heavy wheels on tracks. The house was trying to disorient him, to pull him into a past that wasn't his, to blur his purpose. He followed the winding tunnels deeper, the sensation of descent becoming more pronounced. The air grew heavy, thick with a pressure that seemed to press on his eardrums, his chest. He rounded a final sharp bend, and the tunnel opened into a vast cavernous space. This was the core. It was not a room, but a raw, unadorned cavity carved from the earth, supported by colossal, rough-hewn stone pillars that vanished into the unseen ceiling far above. The air here vibrated with a palpable energy, a low hum that resonated deep in his chest. A sound felt more than heard. In the center, dominating the space, stood a monolithic stone structure, jagged and unworked, like a primeval tooth erupting from the earth. This was where the house breathed, where it fed. This was its heart. A sudden, overwhelming wave of memories crashed into him. Not his own, but fragments, echoes of countless lives, a cacophony of fear, despair, and madness. He saw faces, felt emotions, heard screams that were not sounds but pure agony transmitted directly into his mind. He was a child, lost in a vast, empty hall. He was a woman, weeping silently in a cold, dark room. He was an old man, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended understanding. His own identity began to fray, thin strands of his self unraveling under the onslaught. He was Marcus, the historian, he reminded himself, gripping the small, heavy object in his pocket, a crude, lead-lined box he'd prepared, filled with the specific, potent reagents he hoped would disrupt the house's ancient mechanisms. He stumbled forward, the ground uneven beneath his feet, towards the pulsating stone. The air grew dense, resisting his movements, as if he were pushing through water. The house was aware of him, of his intent. It was fighting back. A searing pain flared behind his eyes, a phantom pressure on his skull. His vision blurred, the cavern around him twisting, the stone pillars morphing into grasping skeletal fingers. He pushed through the debilitating haze, his focus absolute, his determination a raw, burning ember in the face of the encroaching blackness. The house screamed, a silent, deafening shriek that tore at the edges of his sanity, demanding he retreat, demanding he surrender. But Marcus would not yield. He had come too far. He had a plan. It was not a seam, but a deliberate disruption in the oak, a section of the wainscoting that gave way with a soft, grinding protest when he applied pressure at the precise point he'd uncovered in the archives. A sliver of darkness, deeper than any shadow, opened before him. It exhaled a breath that was not air, but a memory of damp earth, stagnant water, and the metallic tang of old rust. This was it. The house's hidden heart, or perhaps its gullet. The panel clicked shut with a soft finality that echoed not in the air, but directly within his skull. He was not in a corridor. The space was formless, a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes and shifting light. He reached out, his fingers brushing against something that felt like solidified regret, then dissolved into nothingness. His own thoughts began to fray at the edges. Names, dates, the familiar contours of his life. They were like sand sifting through his grasp. He focused on a single, anchorsome truth. Marcus am Marcus. Marcus am here to understand. This mantra was a thin thread, but he clung to it. The air here was heavy with a metallic tang, sharper than rust, mixed with the faint, acrid scent of coal smoke and something else, something indefinable that prickled the back of his throat. Above him, a vaulted ceiling, impossibly high, stretched into a perpetual twilight, crisscrossed by skeletal iron girders. This was a railway depot. Empty tracks, glinting dully, stretched into the fog-shrouded distance, converging into a single vanishing point. The scale was immense, dwarfing him, yet it felt strangely contained, as if this entire desolate landscape existed solely within the house. He saw no trains, heard no whistles, only the faint rhythmic drip of unseen water and the low, resonant hum that vibrated through the concrete beneath his feet. It was the sound of the house breathing. Then he saw them. faint, translucent figures, like etchings in the swirling mist, standing beside the tracks. A woman in a worn coat, clutching a valise. A man in a worker's cap, staring blankly ahead. Children, their faces pale and indistinct, holding hands. They were silent, motionless, waiting for trains that would never arrive. They were the houses consumed. Their memories, their life force, now part of this vast spectral waiting room. A jolt of understanding, sharp and painful, pierced through the fog in Marcus's mind. The railway depot. Entire families had vanished, their homes left empty, their possessions abandoned. The official records were sparse, almost deliberately so, mentioning only a mass relocation during a period of economic hardship. But the sheer number, the abruptness, this wasn't a relocation. This was a harvesting. This railway depot was not a physical place, but a manifestation of the house's insatiable hunger, a processing center for the lives it absorbed. The hum he felt was the sound of countless pasts being slowly, relentlessly digested. It didn't just haunt, it erased. To be one of these waiting figures, stripped of self, a mere echo in the house's endless memory banks. He looked at the spectral figures, their vacant eyes fixed on the empty tracks. They were waiting to be forgotten. But Marcus, the historian, the keeper of memories, understood. The house thrived on obscurity, on the unremembered. His very presence here, his act of knowing its true nature, was anathema to it. The ground beneath him began to tremble, the concrete cracking, fine lines spreading like a spiderweb. The faint figures wavered, their forms becoming even more indistinct, as if the house was trying to reabsorb even their echoes. Marcus closed his eyes, forcing his mind to recall. Not just the records of the vanished, but the names, the faces he had glimpsed in old photographs, the snatches of diaries. He remembered the farmer, the weaver, the schoolteacher, the children. He focused on the details, the vibrant specifics of their lives, before they became mere statistics. He was a singularity of resistance. The tremor intensified. The metallic tang in the air became sharper, burning his nostrils. The ghostly figures writhed, their silent forms stretching and distorting, as if pulled apart by an invisible force. The house was fighting back, trying to shatter his concentration, to overwhelm him with its raw, consuming power. He stumbled, falling to his knees on the cracked concrete. His head pounded, his vision blurred. He felt a tearing sensation within his mind, as if his own memories were being ripped from him, piece by agonizing piece. He saw flashes, his childhood home, the face of a loved one, the smell of old books. They were vivid, then dim, then gone. No, he would not let it take him. He had sought the truth, and he had found it. The house was a predator, but even predators had vulnerabilities. Its weakness was memory itself. He pushed against the current of forgetting, not with force, but with the sheer stubbornness of his intellect. Marcus, remember. The railway depot began to dissolve around him. The tracks blurred, the towering ceiling melted into an indistinct haze. The spectral figures, caught between manifestation and oblivion, screamed soundlessly, their forms stretching into thin, desperate wisps. The hum intensified to a deafening roar, a cacophony of lost voices and grinding stone. Then, a sudden, violent expulsion. Marcus gasped, his lungs burning, his body convulsing. He lay sprawled on the polished oak floor of the library. The concealed panel clicked shut, leaving no trace of its existence. He was back, but he was not the same. He pushed himself up, his limbs heavy, his head throbbing with an ache that was both physical and existential. He looked at his hands, at the familiar lines and creases, but they felt alien, distant. He tried to remember his own childhood, the face of his mother, the details of his first academic achievement. The memories were there, fragmented, like broken shards of glass, but the emotional resonance, the warmth, the very texture of them was gone. He walked to the large bay window, his reflection staring back at him. He had wounded the house, perhaps, by asserting memory against its hunger, by refusing to be forgotten. The manor stood silent around him, its stone walls no longer merely confining, but resonating with a new, terrible understanding. He felt its presence, not as an external threat, but as an internal hum, a constant low vibration within his own being. He was no longer just Marcus, the historian. He was something else now, irrevocably entwined, a conscious part of its vast, hungry awareness. The house had absorbed him, not entirely, but enough to make him its own, a living testament to its power, a silent, tormented keeper of its endless memory. The world outside felt distant, unreal, as if viewed through a pane of thick, distorted glass. He had sought to escape its grasp or to understand its absorption. He had achieved both, and neither. He was free, yet utterly bound. He was Marcus, but he was also the house, and the house was still hungry.